E.D. Bullard Company makes personal protective equipment. We and your employer are committed to keeping you protected on the job. So in certain workplaces, we need to provide you with special equipment, because without it, you could get sick, you could become disabled, you could die. Now, we've taken the extra step of creating this video to make you aware of some respiratory hazards in an abrasive blasting environment and to show you precautions you and your employer must take. Here's what we'll cover, and all of it is important. Number one, the potential health risks of a typical abrasive blasting environment. Number two, respiratory protection equipment. Number three, respirator use. And number four, respirator maintenance. If you have any questions after watching this video and reading the instruction manual, ask your supervisor or the person in charge of your safety program, or call the toll-free number that I'll show you when we're all done. Your life and health may depend on it. Okay, just what is it that's so potentially harmful? Well, that's simple. During a typical abrasive blasting operation, dust particles are generated while you work. Those familiar dust clouds are a big bother, of course, and they do contain potentially harmful particles. But it's the less visible and microscopic dust particles that present the most serious health risks. For example, when you're blasting paint off a rail car, a bridge, or ship hull, airborne contaminants are released into the work area. If the paint is lead-based, then lead dust is generated during blasting. If the abrasive material used to blast the surface is silica sand, then silica dust is generated. Lead and silica dust are only two potential deadly enemies. There are others, too, like asbestos, and exposure to these dust particles over a long period can cause both temporary and permanent damage. Silica can mess up your lungs, and lead can mess up your entire body, your blood, your nervous system, kidneys, bones, heart, and reproductive organs. Severe cases involving either of these substances can cause death. So, my first point is, know the hazards of your work environment because there may be harmful dust particles in the blasting area. Okay, how do you protect yourself against the contaminants that are present in an abrasive blasting environment? Since your work area may be contaminated with harmful dusts, federal law says that your employer must give you written procedures for the use of abrasive blasting respirators and provide you with approved respiratory protection equipment. The respirators should be selected by an industrial hygienist or safety professional who is familiar with the hazards of your work environment. There are four basic components to an abrasive blasting respirator. The approved system includes a respirator helmet or hood that covers the head and neck, a cape that covers the neck and torso, a breathing tube with an airflow control device that connects the respirator helmet to an air supply hose, and an air supply hose that connects the breathing tube to the air source. All four components must be present and properly assembled to constitute an approved respirator. Oh, by the way, what do I mean by an approved respirator? Well, an approved respirator has been tested and certified by NIOSH, an agency of the federal government. This approval is your assurance that a respirator will do what it was designed to do. OSHA, that's the part of the government that covers worker safety and health, requires something called a Type CE continuous flow supplied air respirator for abrasive blasting applications. These respirators not only provide respiratory protection, but also protection from abrasive rebound. Your employer is required to measure and monitor airborne contaminant levels in the work area, so they'll know the right kind of respirator to give you. And they're supposed to repeat that monitoring periodically to make sure that your protection is adequate. So my second point is, follow your company's safety rules and wear an approved respirator when hazards are present. If you're falling asleep and you don't remember anything else I tell you, at least remember this, because this is the most important part. Respiratory protection equipment doesn't do you any good at all, if you don't always use it and always care for it properly. If you fudge it even a little, it's like not using it at all. There is more to it than just throwing the respirator on and plugging it in. Now, I know all these procedures can be a pain, and you might think that just once you can get away with bending the rules. But listen to me. If you avoid or ignore these procedures, even a little, you are taking a risk with your health and your life. Now, here's just what I'm talking about. Right now, these guys are risking their health and their lives. Can you spot everything they're doing wrong? And remember, any one thing can make your protection completely useless. Keep this scene in your mind as we review some good practices for using your respirator, and we'll come back to these guys later. Now, when you are issued a respirator by your employer, the very first thing you ought to do is read the respirator instruction manual, approval label, and warnings. Since the instructions are written by the manufacturer who designed and built the respirator, they're an excellent source of information. Instructions can help you understand how your specific respirator works. They also include warnings that you must understand and follow. Failure to follow the manufacturer's instructions and warnings could result in your exposure to contaminants, endanger your health, or cause your death. You got it? If you don't understand something you read in the instruction manual, ask your supervisor about it, or call that toll-free 800 number that I'm going to show you later. So, how do you use the respirator? Well, first of all of these steps must be completed in a clean environment. Your employer should provide a clean area for you to put on the respirator. If you're dealing with lead, your employer must provide an OSHA-compliant facility, like a decontamination trailer, so you can put on and take off your respirator properly and be protected from the environment. Street clothes should be kept in a clean and uncontaminated area. Separate lockers or storage facilities should be used so clean clothing is not contaminated by work clothing and shoes. And believe me, you don't want to take this stuff home with you. Now on to the respirator. Make sure that all the necessary components are present and in working condition before using the respirator. Now, I talked about these components earlier. A respirator helmet, cape, breathing tube, and air supply hose. And these components should be inspected regularly and replaced if damaged. Okay, now after inspecting your respirator and before entering the work area, connect all 4 respirator components. Connect the respirator's breathing air hose to grade D or better breathable air. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means it's the employer's responsibility to make sure the air is breathable. Grade D isn't like a report card grade. It's an accepted standard for breathable air. The air source, the place where your breathable air is coming from, must be located in a clean air environment, away from the contaminated area. And hey, make sure the air intake is not located anywhere near the exhaust pipe of any equipment. Well, otherwise you could send deadly carbon monoxide right into your respirator and you'd be out of here real quick. The air source must be clearly identified as breathable air. If it were not clearly labeled and you were to accidentally connect nitrogen or other harmful gases, you could die. So don't guess. If you're not sure of the air source, ask your employer. Do not hook up to an air source that isn't known and clearly marked as breathable. If your breathing air is coming from a compressor, here are the components required. An airline filter with sorbent beds, pressure regulators and gauges, relief valves set no higher than 125 pounds per square inch, and a high temperature alarm and/or carbon monoxide alarm. Make sure the air supply system is working properly before connecting your respirator. Check it out. Never modify any of the components or override any of the safety controls. They're not there just for looks. They are there for your protection. Next, with the air flowing into the respirator, adjust the air pressure at the point of attachment to within the approved pressure ranges. These ranges are listed in the instruction manual and on the respirator cape. That's right, look it up. It's important. Then, put on the respirator and recheck the air pressure. Put on other personal protective equipment. Your employer may have written procedures that require other protective equipment like heavy-duty coveralls, long protective gloves, disposable coveralls, hearing protection, or safety eyewear. Check with your supervisor. Now, after you've completed these steps, you're ready to leave the clean environment and enter the abrasive blasting work area. Understand procedures for removing the respirator. When you take a break or when you're finished working for the day, it's important to remove the respirator properly and do it in a clean environment. Because when you stop blasting, the hazard isn't gone. Studies show that dangerous dust lingers in the air long after the blasting nozzle is turned off. What you can't see may hurt you, and it could kill you. Exit the contaminated area with the respirator on and the breathing air hose still connected. Do not disconnect the hose in the blasting environment, because if you do, dust, dirt, and debris can settle inside the air supply hose, and when it comes time to hook up again, the contaminants could shoot right inside the helmet. So remember, leave the blasting area wearing your respirator and with the air still flowing. Only disconnect in a clean environment. Store the blasting respirator away from the contaminated area. Do not leave your helmet in the blasting area because dust and dirt can settle inside it, contaminating it and exposing you to harmful dusts. So, my third point is, know how to use your respirator properly. Here are some steps you can take to make sure that your respirator works properly every time you use it. First, inspect the respirator daily. Before and after each use, inspect the respirator for worn or damaged parts. If damage is detected, replace those parts immediately or remove the respirator from service until new parts are available. Abrasive blasting respirators have a limited service life. Certain components, such as capes and lenses, need replacing frequently, and other components should be replaced as necessary. Now, here's another thing that's really important, so listen up. Use approved replacement parts. You should never substitute respirator parts with non-approved parts or aftermarket parts. And let me tell you why. Your respirator was carefully designed and manufactured. So if you use non-approved parts, you can reduce your protection and put your life in danger. You also void the approval for that system. In other words, OSHA field officers can and may cite your employer for using non-approved parts or altering the respirator. This is the government's way of making sure your equipment is properly maintained. So, look for the manufacturer's logo or name on the parts to determine that all your respirator parts are approved. And if any one part isn't, you could expose yourself to hazardous or life-threatening conditions, and it's just not worth it. Use the respirator components as they were designed by the manufacturer and approved by NIOSH. Make sure the manufacturer's name is on all the major parts, including windows, capes, and breathing hoses. Do not modify or alter the respirator, or you could seriously jeopardize your health. For example, a lot of us are tempted to remove the inner window from the respirator. Well, then, when we take a break or stop for lunch, it's easy to just unlatch the outer window to eat or smoke. But hey, when you remove the inner window, the respirator doesn't provide you with the protection it was designed to provide. And if you modify it, you void the respirator approval I mentioned before. Also, when you open the outer window and put your hands inside the respirator, your hands could very well be contaminated with dust, lead, or other hazards from the work area. So you could actually put contaminants into the respirator yourself. Now, I don't want to say that's stupid, but that's stupid. Clean your respirator regularly. The respirator should be cleaned and sanitized regularly by trained personnel. If the respirator is not cleaned, contamination may cause illness or disease. See your respirator instruction manual for details. As we mentioned before, store your respirator in a clean location. After inspection and cleaning, store the respirator components where they're protected from contamination and damage. Use an airtight plastic bag or airtight container. All components must be inspected, cleaned, and completely dried before they're stored. So the fourth point, maintain your respirator.